I'd like to ask Tomasz Waliszewski, who is a professor at the University of Warsaw at the Faculty of Archaeology, and his research interests focus on the archaeology of the Near East in late antiquity and early Islamic times, as well as church architecture at early Byzantine period, ancient mosaics, and agriculture in the Greco-Roman world, with an emphasis on oil production. And it is on oil that his talk focuses. He will talk to us on oil for Theophanes, reflections on the chaîne opératoire of olive oil in late antique Phoenicia.
Still a very good morning to everybody. I thank the organizers to accept my modest contribution. So you know already that by training I'm archaeologist, and my point would be to make a connection between written sources and material evidence. And I apologize, it won't be very about medicine. It will be rather about the staple food, as for the olive oil, but it might be useful also for those who are interested in medicine, since olive oil was always an indispensable ingredient to prepare many of the medicines. So, my story is about a journey made by a certain Theophanes, an Egyptian lawyer, scholasticos, around year 320 AD. So he set off for his journey from Hermopolis Magna, and then his destination was Antioch. And then on the way back, he collected all the bills. His slaves were working also on the, let's say, the formal bureaucratical part of the journey, recording all the expenses during the journey. Thus, we have a quite detailed insight into the conditions of the daily life during the journey, including also the shopping in different places, and including also olive oil. Since we find in one of the sources informations about the purchase of olive oil in the place near Sidon that is very close to the region where I was working with my team for many years, I found it useful to present a kind of a manual for those who are interested in a production of olive oil in late antiquity, roughly around 300, 320. So we are in between Egyptian and Syrian world, and we have a very interesting archival source that was published quite late in 1952, still being a part of Ryland's library at Manchester. But to tell the truth, this source appeared for the first time in the broader context only in 2006, published by John Matthews, who realized a true potential of this papyrus, which tells us simply an account, which gives us an account of the journey of this Theophanes between Hermopolis Magna and Antioch. I give you a kind of an itinerary covering only this part between Egyptian Delta and Antioch. Thus you find information about the overnight stops, including Ascalon, then Caesarea, Ptolemais, Sidon, which will be maybe more interesting for me during this talk. And then, so the final destination in Syria, which is the city of Antioch. So he travels in a company. He has a company of some businessmen, the people from his entourage, and also a few slaves, including 2 Egyptian slaves that are called in this source simply as boys. And during his journey between Egypt and Antioch, and everything takes place during a pace of time of 5 months, so 1.5 months to cover the journey between Egypt and Antioch, 2 months in Antioch to do the businesses, and then to return home. So everything concerns also the economy of this journey. And we find in the documents presented in this papyri informations about the itinerary. Thus, we are sure that the whole company passes through Phoenicia, taking the coastal road between Antioch and Caesarea, Ptolemais, and Gaza. Thus, we find in the itinerary informations about the travels between Apo-Birutu, Apo-Sidon, Eis-Tyron, and this is exactly the place which is interesting for me. And that's why I will develop a little bit. Then we have bills from different places and from different days of his journey. And Sidonio, he makes purchase of different articles like woods, like vegetables, and also a lion kibarion, which should be interpreted in this case as an ordinary olive oil that he purchased for the boys, so for his slaves. Then, so I give you a bigger picture, a context between these 2 points, Hermopolis Magna and Antioch, and I put on the map these 3 red dots, which will mark Sidon, which is the main bigger city in the Phoenician realm, and then 2 other points, which were exactly the villages which were excavated by our team from the University of Warsaw during the last 20 years. Then I go back to the papyri, to the archives of Theophanes, and I find again a purchase of this lion kibarion in Sidon for 400 drachmae. And then I find also informations about other purchases which concern a lion creston, which might be considered in this case as a better quality olive oil that might be used also for some kind of hygienical purposes. And then to explain my point, I would mention also our participation in the projects in Phoenicia. We are on the crossroads of the written sources and material evidence, and I find it quite fascinating to discover that most probably the olive oil that was purchased by this company of Theophanes around 320 might possibly be produced in one of the villages in the region of Sidon, without excluding 2 villages that I will mention now. I will mention also the landscape, which is in this case quite important, because we should be interested in the natural environment that is prepared for the olive tree cultivation. And in this particular part of the Phoenicia, you have a clear distinction between a very narrow coastal belt, which extends to only a few hundred meters. Then you will find a mountainous part of the Phoenician province that is covered, that might be covered by olive trees and by vineyards, and is also inhabited by the villages. And then we come to the village, which is a good example of a place in which the olive oil during the journey of Theophanes was produced. The name of this village in ancient time is completely unknown. Today is known as chaîne, but taking into consideration the local etymology, it seems to be a very ancient name connected simply to some Semitic words, somehow connected to oil simply. Then I give you a very rough plan of this village as far as we know it and understand it, and it consists of a sanctuary that exists in the Roman and Byzantine period. In the Byzantine period, we already have this part of the village dotted with a Christian church, and then what is blue is more or less connected to the housing and production of the olive oil. And then we enter one of the facilities in this village, existing for an incredible waste of time. We are quite sure that this particular building was in use between the end of the 1st and at least 6th century. So can you imagine a building used without any major alterations during at least 400 or even 500 years, only for one purpose, to produce olive oil. And you find the basic installations that you need to produce olive oil, which will be on the first the oil mill in the version known in the Byzantine sources and in Latin sources as trapetum, and then 2 installations for pressing the olive oil, so the press 1 and the press 2, and then at the rear part of this building, near the entrance, you will find a basin that was used simply for the oil decantation in the last part of the whole process of the olive oil production. These 2 photographs I show you just to give you more evidence. And in this particular village, we have discovered at least 5 buildings dotted with at least 9 installations for the olive oil production. It might look like that. This is our interpretation of the material evidence. We have also some botanical evidence found inside the buildings, which are the burnt olive pits. And then I mention another sites which are really in the same area at a distance of only 7-8 kilometers from the village that I mentioned. The site that you see here we know the name, the ancient name, Porphyrion, which was simply a big village, rather constructed according to the urban planification, but nevertheless, according to the late antique terminology, it was still a village. And then another similar settlement, only 10 kilometers from Porphyrion, always on the coast road, linking Beirut and Sidon, and the same road that you see here, which passes through this village, which was most probably used by Theophanes and his company during his journey in around 320. So Theophanes was surely passing through this village, which is called Mutatio Heldua, then probably passing through Porphyrion, and all these villages were full of the facilities for wine and oil production. Thus, my conclusion, which is not very surprising. Yes, probably in such places, so the purchase of olive oil was extremely convenient and extremely easy. Then a few words about the whole process that gives you a possibility to follow the production of olive oil from the harvest. And this picture was taken in northern Syria some 12, 13 years ago, just on the beginning of the war in Syria. And nothing has changed since antiquity. So always the people are working in the olive yards and picking by hands the fruits, then transporting the fruits into the facilities. Working with olive oil, with olive fruits is much easier than working with grapes, because you can wait for even a week or more to start the production of olive oil from the fruit. This is an image that shows you a kind of intermediary phase in the production, when you have prepared already a kind of a pulp from the crushed fruit olives together with pits. And then another picture that shows you one of the possibilities used during the whole history of the Mediterranean, at least during the last 7,000 years, to produce a very basic version of olive oil. And this possibility is very simple. So you use a kind of a very simple installation cut into the bedrock, and then you have a huge stone taken from the vicinity, and you crush the olives with the stone, and the oil will pour from this crushed olives, and then you will collect simply the product, and you will obtain a kind of a liquid that is similar to the olive oil that you can purchase now in the supermarket. But of course, during antiquity, the technology was improving, and around the Hellenistic and beginning of the Roman periods, according to the material and written evidence, you already have a facility that is much more complicated. And this is one of the examples. So you need some stone elements, you need a wall in which you will anchor a beam, and then from the other side of this lever you will attach the counterweights that will exert pressure on the olives that are stored here in the sacks between these two monolithic stones. And here I give you our attempt to reconstruct the interior of the building that I have shown you on the beginning. So the same village somewhere in Phoenicia, between Berytus and Sidon, functioning in the same time as the journey of Theophanes. And then a very basic information about the process of production of olive oil that starts by crushing these olives in this monolithic mill. Then once you already have olives mashed into a kind of a pulp, you transfer this product into a pile of the sacks that you will place under the beam, and the beam that will exert with the help of counterweights will exert a pressure on the olive fruits, and those after 1 hour or 2 hours of pressing the olive oil, the liquid will start to pour into a kind of a basin. And of course, during the Roman and Byzantine periods, there were a series of technological improvements introduced in this part of the Mediterranean, using, for instance, wooden screw that will allow to produce maybe faster and in a more convenient way the product. And then the last part of this process of production will consist of a decantation of the olive oil and to separate it from many impurities like leaves, water, etc., etc. Then you could be interested in some statistics or the quantities that will be produced in such a facilities. And without entering into details, if somebody is interested, I will gladly discuss it. The basic information is that such a facility was absolutely ready to produce during 1 day of functioning around 100 kilograms of a ready product, so the olive oil. And then, of course, if we continue this reflection on the upper level to obtain a kind of a bigger picture, and of course, it's very dramatically different from the quantities of olive oil that you need to prepare medicines. It will be about, let's say, olive oil production on the scale of the whole region, so the scale of the province of Syria or Phoenicia. Then I understand that I ran out of my time, and I will just give you a few informations about the distribution. So you are working mostly on written sources that tells you, that starts from the level that already the people were purchasing the ready products and were transforming these ingredients into a kind of medicine. And I'm interested in the first phase of this production, when the product starts its journey from the place of production to the place where it will be purchased by another part of the people. And of course, you will remember that you need a kind of a container to produce, to transport a ready olive oil from the place of production to Sidon, where the company of Theophanes will buy it. And I will add only that we have found in the same facility connected to the production of olive oil, also some products, some tools that were probably connected to the process of selling this product, which is a typical late antique, typical Byzantine statera balance that we found close to the press. So I won't enter into the details concerning a kind of an economic system behind the whole production, and I will end with a kind of a conclusion that gives you a model of the production of olive oil in this particular part of the Mediterranean that is destined to use to maximum the local environmental conditions. So you have a Mediterranean, a coastal belt of only a few hundred meters covered by different settlements. Then you have olive yards mixed with vineyards, and then mix it up between these different elements. You will find the facilities for the production of olive oil, and in the same region you will also find the places to store olive oil and to sell it. So it's a kind of a very complex economic and social system that finally will end up somewhere in a small shop in Sidon, where the company of Theophanes will purchase some quantities of olive oil for the local consumption. So more or less, this was my point, and I thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that. Our next speaker is Patryk Grancow. He's a postgraduate student here at the history department, and he's currently preparing his MA thesis under Professor Koszko. So he will speak to us about seafood as aphrodisiacs in the light of select ancient literary sources. Please.
Welcome everyone. First of all, I'm sorry for my voice, but I have problems with my throat from a few days. Also I would like to thank the organizers of the conference for allowing me to speak today and present part of my research. And today I would like to talk about one of the uses of seafood by ancient Greeks and Romans. Ancient Greeks and Romans, in order to improve sex life, reached for a variety of methods and practices. And one of the methods available, in addition to love magic, were aphrodisiacs. Ancient literary texts indicate a very wide variety of these products, which were supposed to enhance desire in lovers. And among them, in addition to fruits, vegetables, herbs, or flowers, we can also find seafood. But before I go on to talk about what seafood was used for to arouse desire, I would like to talk a little about the aphrodisiacs themselves. These substances, whose name come from Greek goddess of love Aphrodite, are considered in popular opinion as effective specifics for stimulating libido, increasing desire, pleasure, or sexual activity. Aphrodisiacs in antiquity had a very wide range of uses, but the primary use of aphrodisiacs were to, as I said, increase sexual desire and chance bodily sensation during intercourse, and to make a person a great lover. However, what is interesting, in addition to their role as sexual stimulants, aphrodisiacs have also been seen as medicines. In this role, they appeared as cure for the problem of impotence, an embarrassing problem for many men, as can be seen in Ovid's text. It was believed that aphrodisiacs would be an effective potency remedy to induce and improve erections. Also, aphrodisiacs were supposed to increase fertility and be a cure for infertility. As I mentioned at the beginning of the paper, among various products, seafood was used as an aphrodisiac in antiquity, and ancient sources indicate specific species of seafood that were used to enhance sexual desire. In De Sophiste, we can find a fragment of a play by Alexis, in which the author considers the following seafood to be a great aphrodisiacs: mollusks such as Pinna nobilis, snails, trumpet shells, triton, as well as crustaceans like crayfish. In 8th book of De Sophiste, the same poet expands the above list of aphrodisiacs to scallops, whelks, octopuses, and fat fish. Aphrodisiac properties are attributed to octopus. Also in another passage of De Sophiste, where Athenaeus points out that it is supposed to stimulate sexual attraction. On the other hand, in the same work, another comedy writer, Plato, quotes the feast of Philoxenos, in which products to induce and promote erection are listed. And among them are fish like shark or bream, for example, and also octopus. Unfortunately, this text is incomplete and full list of recommended aphrodisiacs has not survived. Also, according to the work of Diocles of Charistos, who is quoted by Athenaeus, cephalopods, especially octopus, were said to enchant bodily pleasure. Octopus, most likely Octopus vulgaris, sea urchin, and snails were also classified as impotence remedies by the author of Ecloga Medicamentorum. Most likely the author was referring here to aphrodisiacs. Another medic, Mnesitius of Athens, on the other hand, points out that in general mollusks are great aphrodisiacs for improving the achievement of ejaculation. It is worth noting that the term malakia used by the author does not refer to all mollusks, but only to cephalopods like octopus, squid, and cuttlefish. Pliny, on the other hand, in 32nd book of Natural History, mentioned, for example, seahorse among aphrodisiacs. In the passages I just quoted, you can see which specific species of seafood were considered as aphrodisiacs. And among the seafood that were considered as aphrodisiacs, octopus appears most often. However, representatives of other mollusks such scallops, snails, tritons, or pinna, and the crustaceans like spiny lobster are also present. However, the list of species of seafood that were considered as aphrodisiacs should not be limited to those mentioned by the authors. We can assume that probably the vast majority of, if not all seafood, was considered as aphrodisiacs. The passages just presented provide striking testimony to the use of particular species of seafood alongside herbs, vegetables, fruits, or flowers as aphrodisiacs. However, ancient sources that consider seafood as aphrodisiacs are relatively few compared to similar texts about plants. What is the reason for the small number of passages describing seafoods as aphrodisiacs? It is possible that this is the result of the state of preservation of the sources. It may also indicate the popularity of seafood as aphrodisiacs. On one hand, it can be assumed that seafood was such a popular aphrodisiac that ancient authors thought it pointless to write about how to use it. On the other hand, the small number of passages on this topic may also indicate that seafood was not such popular aphrodisiac and was not commonly used for this purpose, but was only one of several options. This may have been influenced by, for example, prized recommendation of medical professionals or individual preferences. Nevertheless, it is difficult to judge which of the above conclusions is entirely correct, and frequency and popularity of seafood as aphrodisiacs are unclear. Written sources have preserved information on how aphrodisiacs were used in antiquity. It should be said that the way aphrodisiacs were used was very diverse. They were consumed, they were made into amulets, and various medicines were prepared. Although we have only few passages describing the use of seafood as aphrodisiacs, we can conclude from them that the method of use was similar to that of other aphrodisiacs. And the passage from first book of the Hypnosophist that I presented earlier indicates the possibility of consumption octopus as an aphrodisiac after the prior heat treatment, stewed and roasted. However, the author does not prejudge the superiority of a particular method of preparing the meat and relates the effectiveness of this aphrodisiac more to its quantity. On the other hand, the previously mentioned fish in that passage is advisable, according to the author, to undergo the process of roasting. It is not entirely clear what this correlation is due to. However, it was probably due to the taste preferences as well as organoleptic properties of the meat after processing. Pliny, on the other hand, in the 32nd book, points to another way of using aphrodisiacs through physical contact. As author wrote, a seahorse worn as an amulet on the right arm was supposed to have a stimulating effect on a man. The practice described by Pliny indicates that some of the aphrodisiacs were intended to magically influence the user. It is likely that such practices were accompanied by incantations to enhance the effect of such an aphrodisiac. What remains unclear is the use of snail and mollusks shells in a similar way as amulets to increase the fertility of the owner. Researchers have not developed a consensus opinion on that issue. Some scientists favor this theory, justifying it by the finds of cowrie shells in Pompeii and Herculaneum, while, for example, Heidelberg considers it an overinterpretation. The biggest difficulty with this issue is that we don't know whether these shells served as jewelry, ornaments, or actually amulets. Nevertheless, even if there was indeed such a practice among Greeks and Romans, it is impossible to determine the scale of the phenomenon. And crucial to understanding the practice of using seafood as aphrodisiacs is an analysis of the reason why seafood was believed to have aphrodisiac properties. The vast majority of seafood available to Greeks and Romans at that time, unlike some other products like, for example, mandragora, did not have an actual aphrodisiac property. This is because seafood does not contain substances whose effect is immediate and can be interpreted as improving sexual life, for example, causing erection or having psychoactive properties. One may wonder, therefore, whether the effect of seafood as an aphrodisiac was related to the placebo effect rather than the actual aphrodisiac properties of seafood. However, it should be noted at the same time that edible seafood is characterized by a high content of micro and macro elements or nutrients, which can affect the quality of sexual life. For example, zinc, which affects semen production. However, this would require regular consumption of seafood. As shown in studies conducted by Gaskin, Sanderman, Lewis, and Chavarro, couples in which both partners consumed more than 8 servings of seafood per menstrual cycle, or about more than 2 servings of seafood per week, reported increased frequency of sexual intercourse and higher fertility, which would confirm the actual aphrodisiac properties of seafood. However, such regular consumption of seafood in quite large quantities was limited for most Greeks and Romans. Therefore, we can conclude from this that the recognition of seafood as aphrodisiacs may have been partly due to the actual aphrodisiac properties of seafood, but also culture played a large role to this phenomenon. And in my opinion, culture played a particularly important role in the process of considering seafood as aphrodisiacs. This phenomenon probably took place gradually and consisted in linking seafood with sexuality on various levels, such as language, beliefs, or imagery. And based on the analysis of the literary sources, it can be concluded that one of the key elements in this matter was the association of seafood with sexual organs due to the morphological similarity. First of all, the shape of the animal was important, which suggested a resemblance to genitalia. As Professor Andrew Dalby states, some food appeared to be in the list of aphrodisiacs because their shape resembles the sexual organs. And seafood whose flesh or shell had an oblong shape was associated with the penis, for example, tentacles of octopus or razor shells. An analogous process of association can also be seen in the case of animals and or their shells, which had a hole or aperture and which were therefore associated with female sexual organs or the anus. Examples of this type of seafood include sirens, clams or cowrie shells. The former, due to its dark color and numerous spines, was also indeed identified with this female womb and pubic hair. The morphological similarity of seafood to sexual organs, however, was not limited only to the shape of animal. Also important were the organoleptic characteristic of the meat, such as taste, smell, or texture. Also, the color of the animal was no less important to the ancients. The color red and pink were associated with penis and vagina. For this reason, crustaceans such as crayfish, shrimp, or lobster were associated with the penis. Also, the pink or red cavities of shells were associated with vagina or anus. Based on presented examples, it can be concluded that the ancients recognized and gladly emphasized the morphological similarity of selected seafood and sexual organs. For some seafood, in addition to the morphological similarity to sexual organs, the linguistic aspect also played an important role. This phenomenon is particularly noticeable in the text of Greek comedies. The names used for some seafood species were similar to terms used in the context of female and male sexual organs. An example is the word used to describe the octopus, polypus, which is the derivative of the word pus, meaning foot, and as well as used to describe the penis or glands of penis. A similar linguistic phenomenon can be found in the context of female genitalia. Hordern points out the names of various crustaceans and mollusks were often used by the ancient Greeks as slang terms for female sexual organs. For example, the word konchos meant a hole in a shell and was also a common humorous reference to female genitalia. Thus, the fetishization of seafood was evident in the text, making it a food clearly associated with sexuality. Therefore, it can be presumed that such a phenomenon influenced the attribution of aphrodisiac properties to specific species, or at least further confirmed people in such belief. Also, the ancients' knowledge of the functioning of the human body played some role in this phenomenon. This is particularly evident in the work on food by Mnesiteus, quoted by Athenaeus. Mnesiteus attributed aphrodisiac properties to cephalopods, connecting their hard-to-digest meat to the production of gases, which, according to his knowledge, at that time were necessary to achieve male ejaculation. This followed from Aristotle, who believed that ejaculation was pneumatic in nature and preceded by the emission of air. Thus, we can see that the use of seafood as aphrodisiacs was not only dictated by linguistic aspects or imagery, but also found justification in ancient medical knowledge. However, we can also assume that the ancient scientific approach to this issue was not the reason, but rather maybe justification for a long-standing practice. The last likely reason for the attribution of seafood, of aphrodisiac properties to seafood has to do with Aphrodite. The name of aphrodisiacs itself, it derived from the name of this goddess who patronized love, beauty, sexuality, particularly relevant to the connection between seafood and love may be the theogonic myth of the birth of Venus, which links her closely to the sea. As you remember, Aphrodite was formed from sea foam and emerged from the sea near the island of Cyprus. And the story was further reinforced by a visual art and the worship of the goddess, which closely associated her with the sea and seafood. Venus, it was believed, had the ability to calm troubled waters. For this reason, she was worshipped by professions related to the sea, like merchants, fishermen, and sailors. She was also given maritime nicknames such as Pontia. What is interesting, in some cities like Naucratis, the two roles of Aphrodite merged, and Venus was worshipped simultaneously as the goddess of beauty, love, sex, and sea. In addition, because of Venus' association with the sea, her attributes became aquatic animals, including seafood, of course, which were her sacred animals, such as scallops. In some cultic centers, it was seafood was to be sacrificed for the goddess. In addition, Aphrodite's association with seafood was further strengthened by visual art, referring to her mythical birth. Because of Aphrodite's association with the sea, in art her attribute became the shell of clam or sea snail, on which the goddess could lie, lean, hold, or ride on. As such depictions we can find among surviving frescoes from Pompeii. Now you can see one of these frescoes from Casa della Venera in Conchilia in Pompeii, when we can see the naked goddess lies on a giant clam and accompanied by Eros and Chimeros. Another example of such fresco is also fresco from Pompeii, now in Napoli, in archaeological museum, where we also can see the naked goddess lying on clam shell. A similar motif can also be seen on a number of mosaics, including the floor of House of Amphitrite in Bulla Regia, which shows Aphrodite in sea scene. The naked goddess is surrounded by tritons, cupids, and also a lot of seafood. Another example, we can see Venus Anadyomene in a combination of cupids and seafood. The maritime image of Aphrodite is also shown by terracotta figurines found in various parts of the Mediterranean and Black Sea, which depict a bust or a whole figure of kneeling or crouching Venus, who is flanked by clamshell. And the above found examples of visual art may indicate a clear connection between goddess of love and seafood, which are her attributes, and thus could justify the use of seafood as aphrodisiacs. Thus, it is possible to see the multiplicity of possible reasons for the attribution of aphrodisiac properties to seafood in antiquity. However, it is impossible to identify only one reason that was crucial in this process. Most likely, the phenomenon of the attribution of aphrodisiac properties to seafood was influenced by a number of cultural factors that affected the minds of Greeks and Romans. And to conclude, as you could see, seafood was used as aphrodisiacs in antiquity, various species of fish, clams, snails, or cephalopods. We don't know the scale of the phenomenon, as I said. It is likely that marine fauna were less frequently used as aphrodisiacs than plants. Seafoods as aphrodisiacs were mainly consumed, although some species were rather worn as amulets. The method of preparation of love dishes was varied and did not affect the aphrodisiac properties of the product. Maybe the choice of preparation method was based on the properties of the meat or taste preferences. to the end, the ancient heritage of considering seafood as aphrodisiacs is still alive, what is interesting, and I will end here. Thank you for your attention.
So thank you very much. So our next speaker is Conan Doyle. He is an assistant professor at the Department of Languages and Literature at the Faculty of Humanities of Charles University in Prague. He received his PhD in 2018, and he has a forthcoming book titled "The Reception of Latentic Latin Medical Texts in Anglo-Saxon England." He will talk to us about pepper, peacock, and petra oleum, the early medieval English reception of latentic dietetic medicine. Please.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'll set a timer so I don't run over. Good, it's actually showing. So the main text I want to talk to you about today is found in a British Library manuscript, Royal 12D17, which is from the mid-10th century. This is the first folio, folio 1 recto. And we can see it goes straight into the text. Leechdoms for all illnesses and infirmities is a rough translation. Now, the sources of this are not well documented, which is what my forthcoming book is all going to be about. But briefly, it contains a small number of extracts from the Ad Glauconum de Methodo Medendi by Galenos, a pseudo-Galenic book that was transmitted alongside that called the Liber Tertius. The obvious late antique sources such as the Medicina Pliny, the Physica Pliny, tiny bit of Vindicianus, but most importantly, Orobasius' Synopsis and Eucharistes and Alexander's Therapeutica. Of Orobasius, we are dealing with the second, what Henning Moreland called the younger Übersetzung, the manuscript, the version that is transmitted in the manuscripts which are now in Leipzig and Stuttgart, not the manuscripts in the Bibliothèque Nationale de France. The other important thing is that tracing these sources is difficult because the Old English text does not cite its sources. All of these things are reproduced in translation quite anonymously. The only authority, Latin or Greek, who is mentioned in the entire manuscript is Pliny, who is called Plinius Semicla Lache, Pliny the Great Physician. Ironically, it's attached to a recipe from Alexander Traianus, or Alexander of Tralles, that is. Now, the biggest problem for medics in England is that what is oiporista, easily procured in the Mediterranean, is not easily procured in England. This is highlighted by the scribe who sort of inserts himself into the text at this point and says, for the bite of an adder, if he gets and eats the bark that comes from paradise, no poison may harm him. Then the one who wrote this book says that it would be hard found. Now, what exactly the bark that comes from paradise is, I'm unsure, but it could be something like cinnamon. Elsewhere in the text, we have a single instance of gloss nihilus, well, an inserted gloss. It's called the southern herb called nails, right? And nails is most likely clove, because claves means nails. When I've mentioned that before, people have poo-pooed the idea and suggested that nobody had cloves at that time, which we've heard the contrary already this weekend. But we've also seen a lot of other materia medica, which just would not be available in England. Malagranata, the pomegranate, melones, dactylos, dates, caraces, citrini, amygdala, malomatiana. All of these occur in texts such as the Liber Tertius. I use the edition, of course, by Klaus-Dietrich Fischer. The Bald-Leach book uses a lot of recipes from the Liber Tertius. However, whenever these things like dates and figs infused with wine occur, they are simply omitted by the scribe, by the translator into Old English. Now, that is quite a different phenomenon to what you find in later vernacular texts. In later vernacular texts, they include all of these exotic ingredients for completion's sake, even if they have no chance of getting hold of them. But this particular text from the 10th century, it omits what's not available. And that is quite significant. And so that is why I called this paper Pepper, Peacock, and Petra Oleum, because all of those are included in this text, despite the fact that you might think they would be very hard to find, in England, that is. So where does the peacock come in? It comes in here in a recipe for what turns out to be bullismus, so excessive hunger. It starts out with, I'll show you the sources in a moment, it starts out in the case of syncope. That's left out of the translation, but we will see if the man faints due to hunger, you have to do all this beard tweaking and ear ringing to revive him, and then you give the therapy and dietetics. Give him the foods that are not too quickly digested, which includes all of these things, bulls, flesh, goats, and hearts, bucks, etc. And fowls that have hard flesh, peacock, swan, duck, right? Why is it called the worst, even though it is recommended? Well, what's going on in the sources is quite interesting. Alexander Trallianus just gives us, revive him from the syncope, then give him those foods which do not digest too quickly. But Alexander, in the Latin tradition, does not say what those foods are. The compiler of this English text has then turned to Orobasius to give us a list of those foods which are digested slowly. And that is where he finds these, the list of the same mammals, and then the flesh of the Barbary dove, left out of the English, thrush, not in English, etc. And more besides, the turtle dove, duck, peacock, bustard. And somehow the swan has been inserted in there. Possibly it was in a version of the Latin that the compiler had. Now, pepper is ubiquitous in this Old English text, even to the point that sometimes in the Liber Tertius, returning to that, the translator includes long pepper, langes pepores, 10 corn, so 10 corns of long pepper, in addition to the normal pepper mentioned earlier. And that's interesting, I think, because we're not even sure they had real pepper, and differentiating your real pepper or Indian pepper from the African long pepper is something I'm not sure an English medic at the time could have done. But the text is quite faithful in retaining that. However, it does some other interesting things. So vinegar mixed with squills, in English, etched with gladen yemengid, is how it translates acetum squilleticum, which is a ubiquitous materia medica in these sources. You're simply supposed to know what it is. And oxymeli, another ubiquitous culinary sauce, is described quite paratactically as take honey and vinegar mixed together. Now, these kinds of translation are interesting to me because I'm interested in what the type of translation tells us about the compiler's understanding of these Mediterranean foodstuffs. And I've realized I slightly disoriented myself with the ordering of these slides. We need to think of foods, but for other audiences who aren't as familiar with the precepts of ancient and medieval medicine, I have these definitions of what constitutes regimen from Jacques Ioannes. That regimen includes not just the principal triad of food, drink, and exercise, but also secondary elements such as bathing and sex, right? And it can refer to the regimen of the sick and the healthy, to paraphrase. So I'll get back to why I was closely analyzing the language in a moment, but I'm not just thinking of the application of the Mediterranean diet. Sex comes into it, and so does bathing. And these people are, the English reception does continue these textual practices at least. Now, here from Oribadius Synopsis, I must admit, the Latin here has caused my peer reviewer quite a lot of problems, because this is, as Henning Moreland pointed out, full of vulgarisms. It's the orthography and grammar are quite bewildering if you don't know the Greek. But this is how the Old English author understood it concerning coitus, and it is close to the meaning of the Greek, by the way. Coitus is no good for all dry bodies, but especially dry and cold. It does not harm the hot and wet. It is worst for the cold and wet, especially those who have a rheumatic disease. It benefits such men that they seek work and drench themselves without the bath and smear themselves with unguents. So the sex and the use of the bathhouse specifically is mentioned in here, and these are both understood by the Old English compiler. However, it must be understood that, especially in a place like England, which had a relatively subsistence economy at the time, only the most elite patients could benefit from the regimen. As Edelstein points out, the man who wishes to live in accordance with the physician's requirements must have time at his disposal and be rich. For who else could not be... Sorry, I'll stop mangling my quotation now. But yes, and that does get me to the point of this manuscript contains medicine specifically associated with a royal court. One of the chapters, the incomplete Acephalus, chapter 62 of Leech Book 2, ends, Lord Helias, Patriarch of Jerusalem, ordered all of this to be said to King Alfred. And this letter apparently accompanied a gift of several exotic materia medica. And this is the only documented point of contact then that would allow the influence of Arabic medicine in such early vernacular corpus as the Old English medical corpus. But we don't know whether Helias of Jerusalem was using Arabic medicine or Greek medicine, because he was most likely a Greek speaker, being an Orthodox patriarch. And this is what he was doing with the petra oleum, petroleum, of course. Similarly, it is good to drink, yes, to drink alone for internal tenderness. And at the same time, he transmits the balsam. Now, unfortunately, the original letter is completely lost. It only survives in this incomplete Old English translation. And of course, Elias of Jerusalem did not speak Old English. He will have written the letter in Latin or written it in Greek and had it translated to Latin before sending it off to England. And here we see balsame and petra oleum. These are not Old English words. They are instances of what I call code switching, and I'll get to the importance of that just now. Where a word is very unfamiliar to the Old English authors specifically, they can't find a translation for it, they just switch language. Then when a word becomes used more, they start approximating it, but treating it as an English word grammatically. So I call this lexicalization. You can have a calque, such as sweet water for aquamosa, or then a gloss replacement. A horn or glass always translates ventosa imponus, apply the cupping glass. So let's see how different words are treated. Wine, the most ubiquitous foreign import, treated as a strong noun. Vinegar, likewise, treated as a strong noun, etchid, and pipor. All three of those inflect strongly, which is linguistically important for reasons I don't have time to explain. Fennel, aloe, cumin, coriander. It's self-explanatory that all except possibly the aloe there could be grown locally, right? Oxymel, the scribe reverts that U consistently throughout Old English, where he or she inserts oxymel, but they know well what it is, and they consistently cross-reference it to a recipe that I believe was taken from Dioscorides. Mastix has its own translation, white chewing stuff. Laurel belly, again, bay laurel, yeah, that could be grown locally. Ginger, and then something that occurs only once is the peach. The more common it is, the more likely it is to be treated as an English word rather than just a loan word like gingiva persica. And sometimes, of course, we get recipes in our late antique texts which assume certain commodities simply being available. So it's actually Philagrius on the spleen tells us to use certain spice mix inserted apud pistores by the milliner, whereas the Leech Book author says, well, you need to grind them and knead them into the bread loaf, because that particular milliner's blend, which was presumably available on the streets of Constantinople, is not available in the streets of London. And then you have the problem here, thanks to David Langslow for providing me a transcription of this passage. The species of seafood and fish are simply left out. Even if the Old English translator had understood these words, they would not have been available in the North Sea or Irish Sea for the fishermen. So you can't get the same fish in the Aegean as you can in the North Sea. You just can't. I realize I need to go quickly now. I'll skip over the physical evidence completely. I'm afraid, and just mention that, well, it does tell us that they didn't have certain animal species available, which we might have assumed they had, but also that everyone in Anglo-Saxon England was equally malnourished from the highest status to the lowest status. That's an interesting finding, which is reported consistently in the secondary literature which I've surveyed. And simply to conclude that for a more in-depth look at all of this, it is forthcoming, hopefully this year, in a festschrift for my beloved PhD supervisor, Debbie Bannon. Because she was a food historian as well as a medical historian, and this was the best way for me to honor her. So there we have it. Thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you very much for that. I think we have made up for some of the lost time. Thank you. Our last speaker is Barbara Zipser, who is a historian of Greek medicine at the Royal Holloway College, and she will speak to us about pharmacy or kitchen, reconstructing the workspace of Ioannes Archiatrus. Please.
Thank you very much. So I'll make it quick. First of all, I'd like to start with acknowledgements. This research project was funded by the Wellcome Trust. And most recently, I've collaborated within this project with Bob Olkin, Andreas Lardos, Ephraim Lev, Mark Nesbitt, Andrew Scott, Rebecca Lazarou, and Christina Patmore. And for this particular piece, I'd like to acknowledge Andreas Lardos and Rebecca Lazarou for their input. Because I've been asked about the project, what you can see here on the screen, that is our method. It has now appeared in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology in late March. Attached, this article contains quite a lot of data, and this is the wrong one, sorry. This is the correct one, Journal of Ethnopharmacology. So this article contains quite a lot of data on ethnopharmacology, botany, and statistics. If you're interested in this, do read this paper, which has now been published. Attached to it are links to our data sources. So we created data sets that sit on a data server. These are openly accessible. So if you find this article, if you read it to the end, you'll find something like underlying data, and that's it. So you are welcome to use it. It's open and it's free. It's underlying data and leftover data. Right. So as for today, if you're interested in philology and linguistics more than the plant names, then this article would be of interest. It's currently under peer review, but because it's a Wellcome project and has been submitted to this platform, the submission is available online. So you can see the article that we submitted. In the end, the names of the peer reviewers and their comments will also be publicly visible. Yeah, so this is under review, but you can still, you can read the article. You can see various things that I have done with linguistics, software, and lateral thinking. And again, for this article, there are underlying data sources linked to this, which are available for free. So you're welcome to use those. So for today's talk, my research question is, it's this text here written by Ioannes Archiatrus. So first of all, where did this author work? It's a medical work from probably almost certainly now Cyprus. Late 13th century is fairly clear. It's a therapeutic compilation, and it consists of two versions. One is written in learned Greek, and the other one is a translation into vernacular Greek with added explanations and a commentary. So we know pretty certain that if it's not from Cyprus, it's from somewhere nearby, and it is late 13th century. This gives us a very nice definition of what we are looking for. The text is very different from other medical texts, which are more, well, medical research papers, sophisticated, handbooks for someone who might work at a major metropolitan center. So this is medicine for people who are poor and who don't have possibly the full education of a doctor at the, I don't know, in Constantinople. So did our author work in the kitchen, a pharmacy, or a medical practice? So what are we dealing with? The evidence for medical practice is there. It's easy to find. It's a therapeutic handbook. The author refers to treatment of patients throughout. And apart from very few magical passages, very, very few, that are not consistently transmitted as well, which are borderline medical, the content of this book is medicine and pharmacy. So that is what the book is about. So we have good evidence to say this book was written by and written for a doctor. Okay, so if we now go to chapter 22 of this here, of this text, I'll read it out to you as well, because I know that this is difficult to read on the screen. So it is a recipe that I chose, which is for when pus is flowing from the ears. So what is the recommendation? Take warm wine and honey and mix them. So far that is easy, warm wine and honey. Then take a clister, but not the one that they are using to treat the anus, but the one that the doctors have, which is called ear clister. And do not put the reed inside, but hold it outside opposite the opening and compress the little pouch so that the juice comes out. And do not be afraid. So in other words, it's a pipette. And the explanation as to how it differs from other clisters is it's an addition of the vernacular translator and commentator. So the commentator just want to make sure that there are no misunderstandings, says that there are special instruments to flush out the ear, which have the same name, but it's obviously for different body parts. So quite clearly, I mean, this is a text that has a medical purpose. But again, at least the final version, the vernacular version, the author has to assume that perhaps, his audience only has a very superficial knowledge of medicine and certainly does not know specialist instruments that flush out the ear. Okay, so that's medical practice. I could go on the whole text. It's a medical text. And now the evidence for pharmacy. What kind of evidence do we have that this is a pharmacy? So most therapeutic texts contain detailed pharmaceutical preparations in form of recipes, but our text is different in that it offers more instructions, craft side instructions on how these medications are prepared. The only strong parallel, I would say, is in Doskonała, which is pharmaceutical handbook. Otherwise, most therapeutic handbooks do not have this information. They have a recipe and they have ingredient A, this quantity, ingredient B, this quantity, ingredient C, this quantity, mix it all, apply to the affected parts, something like this. So our text adds a lot of information on how to prepare it. And I'd like to show you a few passages. Oops. Stop. So, and no, it's the next one. 85 here. So I chose a recipe on how to make hair grow. Put rainwater and fern and gum laudanum into a pan and gourd in dry pieces and put them into a glass vessel and let it hang in the sun for 20 days. So that's quite easy. Rainwater, fern, gum laudanum, and dried gourd in a pan. And then once you've mixed everything, put them into a glass vessel and let it hang in the sun for 20 days. Stir it twice a day. And then stir it once a day and comb it through the hair. So the only difficult to find ingredient here would be gum laudanum. Anything else would be easy to procure. But could you call this a pharmaceutical preparation? I would say so, because there seems to be some sort of chemical reaction or something that has to do with mounting it in a glass vessel in the sun for 20 days. So something is happening with this, whether it's fermenting, whether it does something with anything that is dissolved in it. This becomes clearer in the next recipe, where I think it really starts to look like chemistry. If you want the hair to be black, do this. That is, put austere wine into a pot and crushed ink gall and a type of iron rust and filings of iron, and add vinegar and mix it and put it into a glass vessel and let it hang in the sun for 10 days. Then apply to the hair. So again, we have austere wine, crushed ink gall, a type of iron rust, filings of iron, and vinegar. This is now really beginning to sound like a chemical reaction of some sort, and you can see how that would somehow turn hair black. So it does make sense, but you wouldn't call this a medical preparation. It really does feel like chemistry here. Oops. Another recipe that I put into the category pharmacy is this pharmacy, is this chemistry. For a cloud of the eyes, this usually means some sort of ulcer on the cornea. So pound the leaves of fennel and put the juice into a bronze vessel and let it be 3 days. Then take it out and apply to the eyes. So just one ingredient is fennel leaves, and you pound them and then you put them into a bronze vessel. So something seems to be happening with crushed fennel leaves that emit juice and a bronze vessel. This again looks like some sort of chemical reaction that is happening here. So while, fennel is something that is commonly eaten, consumed in a kitchen, and bronze vessels can often be found in kitchen environments, I think here we have some sort of kitchen equipment and ingredients, but the reaction is actually a chemical reaction, and this falls more into pharmacy. So to conclude on the evidence for pharmacy, I think there's quite a strong point to be made. There are numerous descriptions of pharmaceutical practices that suggest that the author was giving instructions to an audience who would not be able to access the services of a trained pharmacist, or who was a pharmacist themselves, but with either little training or with their training doesn't work because they were trained as a, you know, as a proper pharmacist somewhere in the capital city with everything to their disposal. And now they're on the countryside. And they have to treat people and they have to use what they have. So fennel, that can easily be arranged. And then bronze vessel, that is something that they would have to their disposal. So these are, I think, the points. Now, the next point, the next category would be kitchen. Could this be a kitchen? And 10 points. Oops. Some of the preparations really do sound like cookery. So here's one. When the bowels are hardening, put breadcrumbs into a pan and let it boil with water, and then add honey and make it smooth, and spread it out into cloth and apply. So breadcrumbs, water, and boil this in a pan. So far, so good. And then you add a bit of honey. These are ingredients, and actually the breadcrumbs would be leftovers usually, and to be externally applied. This is something that anybody could make at home. Also doesn't sound really dangerous in any way. There's not much that could go wrong with it. And the mode of preparation, this could be up to the point where he smears it onto a cloth and applies to the stomach. I mean, the recipe of breadcrumbs, water, and honey could as well be biscuits, for instance. Insofar, it's a recipe, a cookery recipe. There are more. Seven. So here's one on strangury, so difficulty urinating. Paragraph 5. Grind radishes, except the leaves. Then put their juice into a pan and wine and let it boil. Then sift it vehemently and let him drink it for 3 days. So basically ground radishes cooked in wine, boiled in wine, then sifting it. So that's it. It's some sort of sauce, I would say, that is prepared here. This does not, again, it does not really sound like a pharmaceutical or chemical preparation. One could argue that something, you know, the wine dissolves, the alcohol is a solvent and it dissolves something that is in the radishes. But overall, it is very, very basic, and there are lots of these recipes in the text. So the next excerpt is from a recipe on alopecia, hair loss. Put pennyroyal and thyme and hyssop into a pan, and mustard and a little honey and oregano and vinegar, and let the vinegar boil there in the morning. Then put it into his mouth. So except for the pennyroyal, which is just plain poisonous, most other ingredients, at least in small quantities, can be found in a kitchen. And again, the process is very simple. It's a decoction of various spices, and the patient is meant to swallow it. 7. Oh, okay. The final excerpt is paragraph 3 in chapter 137 on varieties. So the recipe is very straightforward. Roast millet in a pan and apply as a warm poultice to the area. So nothing else, just millet, a frying pan, you roast the millet, Then you wrap it up and put it on the affected part, on the stomach. That's it. As that's the entire treatment. So again, roasted millet is something that could fit into a kitchen environment. And finally, the final recipe, before I move on to the conclusions. Oops, one. If a person vomits something like fried eggs, do this treatment. That is, let him dip bread into vinegar and into mixed water and let him eat. Let him also eat very thick sour yogurt and chicory with acrid vinegar and let him drink instead of wine, acrid vinegar with water. This is now a normal meal preparation. You know, lots of people have something, except perhaps for drinking vinegar instead of wine. I think what quite a lot of people would have, as a meal. So bread dipped into vinegar and mixed water and thick sour yogurt and chicory, for instance. So here it sounds really like a dietary recommendation, and this recipe could as well come from a kitchen. So except for the passage that I just highlighted about the ear clister, all this is more or less unanimously transmitted in the learned and in the vernacular version. That was on purpose. So now we heard evidence on, whether it could be a medical practice, a pharmacy, or a kitchen, or three combined, or some combined in some way. So how do we visualize the environment of this doctor and the environment for which he writes it? Almost there? The intended audience was not thought to have been able to ask a pharmacist to prepare medication. So he provided instructions on how to make it himself. The only medical instruments mentioned in the text are a dropper or pipette and a clister. Alchemical apparatus is completely absent, unless you want to argue that alchemical apparatus derived from cookery apparatus. But generally, all the equipment that he mentions could be found in a kitchen. The most expensive and exotic would be perhaps a glass vessel or a glass. No specialist equipment is used for the preparation of these pharmaceutical or medical recipes, and all equipment fits into a kitchen. So we have an oven, a hearth, a fire, pan, sieve, mortar, glass vessel, and so on. And all preparations are consistent, all practices for the preparation of the pharmaceuticals are consistent with food preparation. So if you go through the whole 253 recipes, the mechanical process, such as grinding, boiling, macerating, roasting, pounding, and so on, could also be found in a kitchen. The only change is that some of the ingredients you don't have in a kitchen. So for instance, iron filings, iron rust, and some poisonous plants. So this is the only thing that comes in. And sometimes the technique to leave it in the sun, you can do it, for instance, if you want to ferment things a specific way, but generally it looks more like a chemical reaction. So this is my answer. The mechanical process of what they're doing is cookery. The hardware is cookery. The ingredients used are sometimes not cookery. And the whole purpose of the text is medical, and the pharmacy is a means for medical treatment. So thank you, and sorry for being slightly over time.
Thank you very much. This gives us a bridge to lunch. So, are there any questions? Yes, please.
Can I take the mic?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'll stay here, and the others can perhaps also.
I've got a question for Tomasz, one for Conan, and one for Barbara. I'll go quickly. Tomasz, the Caborio? You mentioned there was something called Caborio?
Caborio, yes.
And is this related to the Egyptian beam? So there's a lotus. There's a name in Dioscorides. He mentions the name Caborio as an Egyptian name for something related to the lotus beam.
I'm just surprised. Well, I can't exclude the Russian from
it.
I can't exclude it, but I would be rather.
We need to hear you all. So
Okay.
Okay, maybe leave that with me and you can speak into the mic at the desk.
Or maybe I will take this one.
Yes, you can share the microphone.
No, the two, I would be a little bit surprised. You find this kind of description for the ordinary olive oil in other sources, but, well, at our university, we have also a quite strong department of papyrology. And even yesterday, I was talking to one of our British colleagues working there. I think that we still can expect many interesting informations coming from the sources like papyrology. So I can't exclude that there is some kind of connection. But for the moment, I would say no. For me, the explanation given by John Matthews, as this is simply an ordinary oil, I accept it. And unfortunately, I don't have any additional information.
It's fine. It's a peculiar word, that's all.
Yeah.
Okay. Conan, just one thing is about the long and the black pepper. They are thought to be the same plant up until Manually in the 16th century. So it's just that long pepper was thought to be, as far as I know, maybe Andrew Donnelly knows better. This than I do, but this is what I thought actually, that they were thought to be the same plant. So if you have one, it's not weird to think that they might have the other. And for Barbara, just a question about the kekis, the gall and iron recipe. The Dioscorides does mention that kekis or oat gall is used for dyeing hair black. So it is yes, it's a chemical kind of experiment, but it's one that's already in pharmacological compendia quite early on.
It's there, but I was looking at how does it present in the context of our source? So the practices are there, most of them, not all of them. In particular, the way it looks a bit like alchemy or like chemistry, they go back to earlier sources and eventually to Paul of Aegina. But it's about 5 steps removed from there and a process of simplification. So I was in the end looking at what is this actually? What kind of context is this?
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so we have Erasmus and Isabel, and we have 2 questions online. 3 already. So should we? Yes, please.
Jakub, maybe?
Okay.
Okay, if I may. Hello, and first of all, thank you very much for the really wonderful papers. I'm thrilled with what both Conan and Barbara said. I'm really interested in that. I'm aware of the fact that you're about to leave for the lunch, and my questions are rather long, so I'll try to make it short. And I'm aware that you are not able to answer me fully, but, well, I hope you could at least give me some details. So, first of all, in the early modern period, which I'm into, there are already well-acquainted sets of substitutes, and the knowledge on the substitutes is already well established. And can you tell, but for both of you, a question actually, are there any, is there a well-established knowledge on the substitutes, or were they applied randomly? Did they have a system already that was followed by most, at least, of the apothecaries or the doctors, medicians, or is it rather randomly? And the second question is, I think more to Barbara, did you try actually to do the reconstructions, to reconstruct any of these recipes? What I mean, are they doable? Does the description really tend to describe what is being done? Can it really be done? Because what I'm seeing in the early modern period, that sometimes these descriptions do not give you all the details, and sometimes without extra knowledge outside of the source material, it's not doable. So these are my two questions. Sorry.
Yeah, so in means of substitutes, there was a large literature about substitutes in antiquity and the Middle Ages, and there were lists for this. What people did in the end is obviously something different. Our text mentions substitutes, and they're usually quite simple. And if you go through the translation that you just saw on Welcome Open Research, the phrase would be, if you do not have, if you search for this, if you do not have, and then you'll find the substitutes. But what they did in the end, we don't know. In means of experiments, we, yes, a team member, Andrew Scott, conducted quite a lot of experiments. The paper has now been submitted, and he particularly investigated any burnt substances. And there are some results, but it's not, the paper isn't out yet, and I don't want to present for Andrew. So he is a geologist with a particular expertise in burning and coal, charcoal. Yeah, so I didn't. He did. He conducted experiments. There was an electron microscope involved, and there were various chemical analyses involved in this, but it's not out yet.
Sorry. On the issue of substitutes, I don't think there are many lists of quid quo pro, or rather any, in the vernacular material that I'm dealing with from such an early date. However, they do like to give an awful lot of recipes for the same thing using different ingredients. So if you don't have fennel juice to store in a brass pot, you can use the juice of another herb and store it in a brass pot, and so on. So just for mist of the eyes, again, it occurs there are something like 56 different recipes for eye complaints in the Old English text I'm talking about. So that gives you a lot of room for finding one you have the ingredients for, I think.
Okay, thank you. And the next.
Let's stay with online.
Online is.
Yeah, maybe Professor Waliszewski.
Professor Waliszewski.
Yes, Professor Baldessori.
I think she froze again. Yeah.
So the next.
Okay,
The next question is by.
Professor Down.
Yes.
Elizabeth, are you with us?
No.
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, great.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. So thank you for the conference and the presentations. And I would like to add a short question or note intended for Patryk. So as I understand, you wondered about the use of seafood as aphrodisiacs when it doesn't really have any active substances, active ingredients, which seems weird. But if you think about the scandalous fame that certain poison-making women had in ancient antiquity, I refer to women who were making the so-called petra. So these magic substances which were supposed to to induce love or strong feelings in man. And these nearly always intended with catastrophic consequences, I mean death. So the thing is, if you eat fish or if you eat mussels, then at least you won't die. And I think that's the explanation in my eyes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just my first impression was that it was iodine, which works, hypothyroidism is quite common in women and a common cause of infertility in women. So iodine obviously can counteract some types of it, and that makes sense.
Okay, so Erasmus Magnus.
Yes, I have.
Thanks all of you. I had a comment for Barbara, of course. Barbara, this was very fascinating. And I think that in the history of alchemy, the connection between alchemy and cookery is very early acknowledged. We have, certain Byzantine authors that they explicitly say that we owe a lot to cookery. But apart from this, there is a common misconception that in order to produce an alchemical outcome, you need an elaborate equipment. Mm-hmm. Far from it. Even from the very early beginning of in the history of alchemy, I mean, you can attest this through the chemical papyri of Leyden and Stockholm, which date around the 4th century. You can see that more often than not, they use kitchen equipment. Mm-hmm. And I could, and Marina could attest to this, if I had the equipment right now, I could, in just half an hour, change the silver appearance of an object to a golden one with using just a pot and a heating source. Mm-hmm. I guarantee this. So from very early on, the connection between cookery and alchemy, at least, are given. Mm-hmm. So this is my point.
Yeah, I mean, you can change the color of beetroot. I mean, in borscht, for instance, by adding, making more alkaline or more acid. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Erasmus has done that experiment many times. So, Elizabeth, any? It worked.
So also from me, thank you very much, all speakers. And I have a short comment for Patryk and one very short question for Conan. So Patryk, it's fascinating your work on seafood as aphrodisiacs, and I encountered in some textual annotations in later Byzantine manuscripts that it was exactly the contrary. It was used by monks, and they were allowed to use it instead of flesh, instead of meat, and instead of fish to some special times. So it's interesting how it changed connotation. And this question for Conan is, you mentioned long pepper and you mentioned normal pepper, but this is always black pepper, or are there other varieties of pepper?
Normally it's just called black, but I think sometimes it mentions green in the Latin sources. But I think because if it's imported at all, it's imported as black grains, it's black pepper to the English, I think.
I would just love to add, since my name was mentioned, that I've heard two comments on long pepper, and I don't agree with either of them. I would say long pepper comes from Bengal and Orissa, and it's very small peppercorns, but in a long bunch, about that length, less than an inch length. Not from Africa. I don't know what the African one is, to which price you refer.
Oh, that may have been me misremembering, but I was thinking of the one that's in a very, very small corner.
Then I agree with you precisely. I'm very happy.
Okay. And we've got Professor Grancow online.
Professor Grancow?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. My connection is still giving me problems. I have one telegraphic question for Conan Doyle. I was interested in his Alexander source, but I've seen he already asked to David Langslow, so I wait for the results. But my question is about the mention of the Syriac. You did, if I remember well, it's about exchanges of trading between East and West. And the mysterious white stone, did you think about ambergris? It's not so white, but it could be light gray. And maybe about Syriac, there was an exchange from east to west of the Syriac. Do you have any idea or any source about it?
Regarding Teriac, Mithridatum is elsewhere glossed in Old English as the potion made from adders, as doctors know how. So they had some kind of Teriac or Mithridatum recipes. I can also track down the Latin recipes for Mithridatum and Teriac, which are somewhat confusable. I'm not entirely sure whether they're synonymous or not, depending on what source you consult. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One more question, I think. Okay.
Yes, thank you very much. It's a question for Barbara. I was wondering, I don't know, maybe I missed it. So in your recipes, there's no dosage ever?
No, there is dosage. It's rarely, but sometimes there's a dosage in these recipes.
Okay, and I was wondering because it always looks, but I will talk about it tomorrow, but it looks very Galenical because also in Galen, even if you have the recipes, you have a lot of explanation on how to prepare it. And so in Galen you have, for example, sort of guidelines. So you have, like about the ratio of substances or kind of digressions to make it kind of a very educational type digression. So to give information about certain, like a category of substances or the ratio between substances and so on. So I was wondering, in this case, since you have like your author, your commentator that explains a lot, and then maybe in between the recipe, you might have digression about general guidelines to, about quantities or even preparation, dissolve this, usually that's kind of a general rule. You usually need to dissolve this in this solvent and this other ingredient in that solvent also.
There's no theory in my text, so there are no theoretical explanation as to why they do it. There are quantities rarely. And apart from this, as opposed to Galen, who gives a lot of, Galen and Dioscorides give lots of explanations, but they're in their nature very different from my text. So in my text, it would be, how do you use a pipette, for instance, So it is all very much practical.
It's just the procedure, basically, mostly.
And it's basically
the procedure.
Like if you look up today a recipe for food, so you take the frying pan, then you put the chopped onion inside and a spoonful of oil, and then you fry it for about 2 or 3 minutes. So it's this kind of step by step and very basic. There's no assumption that the person who does it has any idea of what they are doing, any specialist training, anything like this.
Thank you. Okay, I think we should thank you very much. If there is any other